Corvin Price did not ask his wife to sit down before he handed her the papers. He did not lower his voice. He did not wait until the room was private. He placed the settlement documents on the dining table between the water glasses and the centerpiece, looked at Ilana Westcott Price like she was an appointment he had been meaning to cancel, and said, "I need your signature tonight." Ilana Westcott Price, 34-year-old wife of Corvin and the quiet woman who had spent 6 years building a life beside him, still had her coat on. She had come straight from the hospital. The coat smelled of cold air and antiseptic and the particular stillness of a room where someone was dying. She had not had time to remove it. She had not had time to say what she needed to say, which was that her father had stopped recognizing her that morning, that the doctor had used the phrase days, not weeks, and that she had sat beside him for 4 hours holding his hand while he stared at the ceiling. She said none of that. She looked at the papers instead. At the far end of the table, Ines Price, 62-year-old mother of Corvin and Ilana's mother-in-law, sat with the particular composure of a woman who had been rehearsing for this moment. She wore pearl earrings and a cream blazer, and held a champagne flute loosely in her fingers, as if it was something she had been carrying all evening. Near the doorway stood Sella Vane, 31-year-old brand consultant at Price Meridian Development, and the woman Ilana had watched replace her in every photograph taken over the past 8 months. Sella wore a dark-fitted dress and the composed expression of someone who had already been told how the night would end. On the table, beside the legal folders, sat a silver-framed photograph. It was a photo of Corvin at the groundbreaking of his first major development, the Hargrove Commons project that had nearly destroyed him before it saved him. Ilana was not in the photograph. She had been the one holding the camera. Davin Hart, 44-year-old divorce attorney and a man who had learned the particular skill of looking uninvested in the outcomes he arranged, sat to Corvin's right with a pen aligned parallel to his notepad. "The terms have been outlined in the attached summary," Davin said. "If both parties sign tonight, filing can happen by end of week." Ilana had not looked at Corvin yet. She was still looking at the papers. Then she looked at Sellas. Then she looked at Ines, who held her gaze without blinking. Finally, she looked at her husband. "You planned this while I was at the hospital." Corvin set his jaw. "I didn't know you were at the hospital." "You didn't ask." That silenced him for a moment. Then Ines shifted in her chair and spoke in the smooth, practiced tone of a woman who had decided to be useful. "Ilana, no one is trying to humiliate you. Corvin has simply reached a place where honesty is more important than comfort. Surely you understand that." Ilana turned slowly toward her. "Does he?" Ines smiled. "A man growing into his potential needs a partner who can grow with him. That has nothing to do with character. It has to do with alignment." Ilana waited for Corvin to correct his mother. He did not. She looked back at the papers. At the corner of the stack, a handwritten flag from Davin marked a page he wanted reviewed. She tilted it slightly and read the heading, "Family Trust Disclosure, Separate Property Interest." That page had been added by someone else's hand. Someone who had known it mattered enough to include. Davin followed her eyes. "There's an inherited property interest attached to your family trust," he said quietly. "I'd recommend we request a full valuation before any waiver." Corvin waved one hand. "I don't want anything connected to her family. I never did." Davin wrote something on his notepad. He wrote it slowly, with the careful deliberateness of a man creating a record. Ilana looked toward the far wall, where Fen Ardley, 29-year-old junior finance analyst at Price Meridian Development, stood with a folder against his chest and an expression that had been tightening for the past 20 minutes. He had been asked to serve as a corporate witness for the business separation terms. He had worked at the company for 2 years. He had seen enough to understand what was being erased. She signed, not because she was broken, not because she believed the marriage had been worthless. She signed because Corvin had already made his choice, and she understood, somewhere quiet and cold inside herself, that a signature on paper was the cleanest thing left in the room. Corvin signed his own pages without pausing. When he finished, Ines stood and raised her champagne glass towards Sella. "To clarity," she said, "and to men who finally understand the difference between a foundation and a ceiling." Sella accepted the glass. Corvin did not raise one, but he let it happen. Ilana removed her wedding ring. She placed it beside the signed papers with a small, deliberate motion, the way she placed a bookmark in the last page of something she was finally finished reading. Then her phone buzzed inside her coat pocket. She already knew, before she read it, in the way you can know a thing before its words arrive. The message was from Suri Oland, 38-year-old trust attorney, and the person who had known Ilana longer than anyone in that room would believe. Your father passed 20 minutes ago. The succession is active. Please come to the estate tonight. Don't wait. Ilana read the message once. She pressed the phone against her palm. She did not look up. Behind her, Enos said something warm to Sella about the living room renovation. Corvin laughed at something. The champagne glass touched the tabletop with a small bright sound. Ilana folded the message away, pulled her coat tighter, and walked out of the house without speaking again. Outside, the street was wet from earlier rain. The air smelled of cold concrete and the last edge of a storm that had passed while she was at the hospital. She stood at the bottom of the front steps for a moment, not going anywhere, not crying, just standing. She thought of her father. She thought of the last time he had looked at her clearly, 3 weeks ago, when his eyes still tracked and his voice still worked, and she thought of what he had said. I built all of it for you, Ilana. I just built too much of it in rooms you couldn't see. She had answered in the way daughters answer when they are not ready for the weight of something. I know, Dad, I know. Now she walked to the waiting car, and the gate closed behind her, and the lights of the house stayed on, warm and oblivious, while everything changed in the dark. 6 years earlier, the room where Corvin Price had nearly lost everything smelled of carpet adhesive and old coffee. It was a rented conference suite in a third-floor building on a street where half the storefronts had closed. The chairs were the kind with wheels that never rolled straight. Ilana had been sitting in one of those chairs at 11:47 in the morning, reviewing the development pitch deck that Corvin was supposed to present to the Leland Group partners in 13 minutes, when she found the number. The projected lease absorption rate was wrong, not by a little, by enough that any experienced investor in the room would stop the presentation and start asking the kind of questions that ended meetings early. Corvin was across the hall. He had gone there after reading an email from his contractor about a cost overrun on the Hargrove Commons site, the 3-acre development deal that was either going to make his company or take everything he had borrowed to build it. Ilana looked at the number. She looked at the methodology tab. She looked at the assumptions column. Then she corrected it. She updated the slide. She pulled up the supporting data on her laptop and replaced the flawed chart with the clean one. By the time Corvin came back with pale eyes and too tight shoulders, she had reprinted the corrected page on the building's lobby printer and walked it back upstairs. Your absorption rate was overstated. I fixed it. He stared at her. The presentation is in 9 minutes. I know. The corrected number is lower, but it's defensible. The original number wasn't. His jaw worked. Investors fund confidence, not. They fund honesty. That sounds like discipline, she said. There's a difference. Go wash your face. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he took the corrected page and walked toward the conference room. When the Leland Group partners asked the hard questions 20 minutes later, Corvin had real answers. By the end, the lead partner leaned forward and said, in the dry voice of a man who had watched too many founders oversell, "You came in here with a problem and a number you could defend. That's not common." The Leland Group funded the Hargrove Commons project 4 weeks later. That night, in the parking lot of a dinner they could barely afford, Corvin had held her face in both hands and said, "I would have walked in there with the wrong numbers. You knew it. You could have let me." She had said, "I know. Why didn't you?" She had not answered the full truth, which was complicated by the life she had left behind to stand in that parking lot with him. She said only, "Because I don't want to watch something fail that doesn't have to." He believed that was about the business. It was also about him. 3 years after Hargrove Commons, Price Meridian Development had offices with floor-to-ceiling windows and a logo that appeared in the business section of the regional paper. Corvin had been on 2 industry panels. He had been photographed for a magazine profile. He wore suits made for him by a tailor who called him by his first name. The dinner for the Price Meridian expansion launch was held at the Drayfield, a hotel where the napkins were folded into shapes. Ilana wore a navy dress that fit her correctly and said nothing about itself. She had chosen it because Corvin had once told her she looked grounded in that color, which she had taken as a compliment. The event photographer found her once near the client welcome table and asked her to step back for a wider shot of the logo wall. She stepped back. She did not find a way into the frame again after that. Sella Vane was everywhere that night. She moved through the room, like someone who had been introduced to every surface in advance. She laughed at the right volume. She touched the right arms. She made Ines feel seen, which was the particular skill of people who understood that mothers were often the easiest door into a room. Later, in the side corridor near the venue kitchen, Ilana found them standing together, not doing anything that could be photographed. but standing in the way that people stand when they have already decided to stop, pretending distance was required. Corvin saw her first. His face went through several things quickly and then settled on irritation, which was the emotion he had been choosing most often lately. When she appeared in rooms, he had not expected her to enter. "Don't make this something," he said. She did not make it something. She walked back to the event. She stood in the right places. She said the right things to the clients she recognized and the vendors she knew. At the end of the night, standing under the Drayfield canopy in the mist, while Corvin's car pulled away with Sella and Innes inside it, Ilana's phone buzzed. It was Suri. "Your father's doctor's called. He's asking for you. Please come this week. Don't put it off." She had put it off. She was afraid of what she would find when she arrived. The particular cowardice that comes from loving someone so much that watching them diminish feels like an attack on everything you believed was permanent. She went the next morning. She kept going. And one afternoon 6 weeks later, sitting beside her father's bed, while the machines beeped softly and his hands lay still on the covers, Galen Alderton, 67-year-old founder of Alderton Holdings, and the man who had taught Ilana to read a balance sheet when she was 11 years old, reached for her hand. He found it. He held it. He said, without opening his eyes, "You have always been the sharpest person in every room you were in. You just kept leaving before they figured that out." She pressed his hand against her cheek. He said, "Don't do that anymore." Suri was already at the estate when Ilana arrived. The house smelled of her childhood: polished wood, old books, the cedar oil that Marta Pels, 65-year-old family housekeeper, and the woman who had helped raise Ilana after her mother died, used on the panel doors every autumn. Marta met her at the entrance and held her for a full 30 seconds without saying anything, which told Ilana everything about the shape of her own face. Owen Kress, 55-year-old managing director of Northgate Capital Partners and the executive responsible for managing the transition of Alderton Holdings' investment arm, was already in her father's study. He was a careful man who wore careful suits and had spent 20 years watching Galen Alderton make decisions that other people later called inevitable. Suri spread 3 folders on the desk. She opened the first one. "Your father's succession instruction is clear," she said. "You are the controlling beneficiary of the Alderton Family Trust. The trust holds the majority interest in Alderton Holdings." Ilana looked at the desk. Her father's old draftsman's compass sat in its velvet case near the lamp. The same compass he had used to mark coordinates on site maps when he first started buying land with borrowed money 40 years ago. She had carried a smaller version of it in her coat pocket for years, the way some people carry photographs. "What is the current valuation?" she asked. Owen answered without pause. "Alderton Holdings, inclusive of its subsidiaries and the Northgate Capital Partners portfolio, carries an enterprise value of approximately $18 billion. Ilana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He left me the responsibility." Owen said, "He left you the decision." She lifted one of the folders and read the first page, then the second. Then she turned to the index and her eyes stopped. Under the Northgate Capital Partners active deal pipeline, the investment division her father had built to fund commercial development across the region, there was a list of companies under strategic review. The third name on the list was Price Meridian Development. Ilana set the folder down carefully with both hands. Suri watched her. "We can remove it from the review cycle before anything proceeds." "No," Ilana said. Owen waited. "Removing it is interference," she said. "Approving it because of history is interference. Rejecting it because of history is interference. Run the standard process. Every check, every disclosure requirement, every number verified." Suri wrote something on her notepad. Ilana continued, "And I want the same governance standards applied to every company in this cycle. Signed projections, independent vendor reviews, no undisclosed executive conflicts, no letters of intent classified as signed contracts." Owen made a note. It was a short note. It said everything. She did not announce herself publicly. She spent 6 weeks visiting Alderton Holdings Properties, a logistics facility in the industrial district, where the floor managers knew her father's policies better than the regional director did. A medical office development where the leasing team had been working short-staffed for 2 quarters, a mixed-use site in the River District, where the construction crews arrived early every morning, without anyone in the executive suite appearing to notice. At each place she asked questions that surprised people. Not grand questions, questions about overtime approval processes, about whether safety concerns had been escalated and addressed, about which decisions required sign-off from people 2 levels above the people who actually understood the site. One senior executive, a man named Corvin Bale, who had served under her father for 19 years, leaned back during her third briefing and said that her father had usually preferred decisions to move quickly. Ilana looked at the report in front of her. She lifted one page. This division has 2 debt renewals due within 6 months and to supply a dispute whose costs haven't been updated since last quarter. She set the page down. My father also built systems strong enough to survive men who moved too quickly. I intend to keep them. No one tested her again after that. Fen called her once during that period. She had not expected it. I'm sorry, he said, for what happened. I was there and I didn't say anything that would have mattered. She said, you stayed. He was quiet for a moment. Then I sent the vendor records to Northgate. Corvin knew about sellers' contracts. He knew about the inflated figures in the renewal projections. He got a memo from me 7 months ago. He read it. He never answered. She said, tell them everything that's true. Don't add anything. Don't remove anything. She hung up. She thought of the corrected absorption rate from a rented conference room 6 years ago. She thought of a parking lot dinner and the sentences she had given him that were honest answers to incomplete questions. She thought of her father's hand finding hers in the dark. Then she went back to work. The Northgate Meridian Investors Summit was held at the Caldwell Center in a hall with a ceiling tall enough to make most people feel appropriately small. Corvin arrived with a new suit and a presentation that Seller had rebuilt over 3 weeks, cutting anything that sounded cautious and replacing it with language she called certainty by architecture. Ines sat in the 4th row. She had already written the ending in her head, which was the particular kind of confidence that comes before the floor gives way. Corvin had seen the initials on the keynote list 2 days earlier. IA. He had asked Seela if she knew who it was. She had said it was probably a fun name. He had not asked again. When the hall lights dropped and the stage lights rose, he was seated 5 rows back with his pitch deck on a tablet and his scheduled slot at 11:45. He was thinking about the opening line Seller had given him, which was smooth and large and said nothing true but sounded like it did. Then the announcer said, please welcome Chairwoman Ilana Alderton of Alderton Holdings and the Northgate Capital Partners Investment Division. Corvin did not move. She walked onto the stage in a charcoal suit with her father's compass in her jacket pocket where it always was. She did not look into the audience first. She walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone with 2 fingers, and waited until the room was completely still. My father built Alderton Holdings on one belief, she said. Capital follows integrity, not performance, not image, not the confidence of men who have learned how to sound certain. She paused for one breath. He believed the difference between a builder and a developer was simple. Builders stayed long enough to see what they made become real. Developers left when the photographs were done. Ines in the 4th row had gone very still. Seller sat beside Corvin with her eyes on her lap. Owen Kress stepped to the secondary podium after Ilana's remarks and outlined the new Northgate governance standards: verified revenue projections, independent vendor reviews, executive conflict disclosures, no letters of intent, classified as signed contract. The language was careful and specific and reached for exactly the places Corvin had left unguarded. No company name was spoken. The room did not need one. Corvin's phone lit up. A message from his board chair, Nolan Grieve, emergency session right now. Seller's phone lit up beside him. She read it and did not show him the screen. He recognized something shifting in her expression, the first geometry of distance, the beginning of a door she was already measuring. He stood. He moved toward the stage. The security lead intercepted him gently, and Ilana was already moving with Suri and Owen toward the side corridor. Ilana. She stopped. She turned. He looked at her across 5 feet of cleared space, and for the first time since the dining table, she looked back at him with her full attention. Not with anger, not with triumph, with the quiet recognition of someone who no longer needed him to understand. I didn't know, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. No, she said, you didn't ask. Suri stepped beside her. Mr. Price, if you have questions about the governance review, the process contact is listed in the summit materials. Ilana turned and walked away, and he did not follow. The board removed Corvin from Price Meridian's leadership inside 10 days. The Northgate Review documented inflated projections, the undisclosed executive relationship with Seela's consulting firm, reclassified vendor invoices, and Fenn's 7-month-old memo sitting unread in Corvin's sent folder. Sellar's firm lost 3 client contracts before the month ended. Bram Vass, 26-year-old assistant who had done the actual reclassifying of the invoice files, cooperated with investigators. He was 26 and frightened, and he made the choice that frightened young people sometimes manage to make. Ines called Ilana once. The call lasted 4 minutes. Ines said in a voice smaller than Ilana had ever heard from her that she had not understood what she was doing. You didn't need to know about Alderton Holdings to know that what you did was wrong. You toasted to my replacement in front of a photograph of my dying father. Ines had no response to that. Ilana did not wait for one. Corvin asked for a private meeting. She agreed with Suri present. He came in without a prepared speech. He sat across from her and said, "Why didn't you tell me who your father was?" She looked at him steadily. "You knew who I was. You just didn't think it was enough." He flinched. "If I had known." "That's why I didn't tell you," she said. "If $18 billion would have changed what happened between us, then signing those papers was the most honest thing you ever did." He looked down at his hands. She did not reach across the table. She had spent 6 years reaching. She let the space between them remain what it was. "I hope you build something real this time," she said. "I mean that." He looked up quickly, searching for a door in it. She gave him none. Alderton Holdings acquired the operational assets of Price Meridian under a restructuring agreement. The employees kept their jobs. The technology and the active project pipeline were preserved. The Hargrove Commons site, the first one, the one that had mattered, was included in the portfolio. On a Wednesday morning in November, Ilana signed the Worker Protection Initiative in the estate study where her father had once built things that lasted. She signed it with his compass case open beside her and his old draftsman's compass resting on the folder, the way he had always kept it near when something important was being decided. Not for luck, because weight mattered, because some things should feel heavy when you do them. Afterward, Marta brought her coffee without being asked. "How do you take it?" Marta asked, which she already knew, but asked anyway, because some things are worth saying out loud. "Strong," Ilana said. "No sugar." Through the study window, the late autumn light came across the rooftops of the city her father had spent 40 years building, quietly, without photographs, in rooms he never needed anyone to see. Ilana picked up the compass. She turned it once in her hand. Then she put it back in her pocket, where it belonged, and went to work.